There is something profound, something almost indescribable about walking into a sacred space, a church. Not just the physical structure, but the presence within it. You can feel it, a stillness, a peace, a quiet invitation to step beyond the noise of the mind and into something deeper. To be connected to the church is to be connected to something far greater than ourselves. It is a portal to spiritual awakening, a place where the noise of the world fades and we remember what is truly essential. Some people say, I can experience God anywhere. Why do I need a church? And yes, God is everywhere. But we must ask ourselves, how often do we truly pause to experience that presence in our daily lives? The mind, caught in its endless stream of thoughts, distractions, and worries, rarely allows us to rest in that deep awareness. But within the church, there is a collective energy, a stillness cultivated over generations that makes it easier to step into that space of connection. When we gather in faith, something extraordinary happens. The burdens we carry begin to lighten, not just because of our own prayers, but because we are supported by others. We share in the joy of the divine, not as isolated seekers, but as one body, one spirit. The church is not just a structure of bricks and mortar. It is a presence, a living field of faith that transcends walls and ceilings. When you step into a church, something shifts. You may not be able to put it into words, but you feel it, a stillness, a peace, a subtle but undeniable energy that holds you in a way the outside world does not. This presence is not created by any one person, nor does it belong to any particular tradition. It is the collective faith, the shared devotion, and the silent prayers of all who have walked through its doors before you. Something happens in a space where people have gathered for years, decades, even centuries, with a singular intention: to seek God, to surrender their burdens, to lift their hearts in prayer. The very atmosphere becomes infused with that purpose. You can sense it when you enter, as if the walls themselves have absorbed the quiet cries, the whispered hopes, the moments of deep surrender. The church becomes more than a place, it becomes an invitation, a sacred container where the soul can finally exhale. There is power in being connected to such a space. In a world that constantly pulls us in 100 directions, where distractions fill every moment and the mind is rarely at rest, the church stands as a refuge. Here the usual noise begins to fade and something deeper emerges, a presence beyond thought, beyond time. It is not something that needs to be created, it is simply revealed, uncovered from beneath the layers of mental chatter and worldly concerns. Being connected to the church means aligning yourself with this presence. It means stepping into an energy field that supports your spiritual awakening, whether you are aware of it or not. Some people walk into a church and suddenly feel lighter without knowing why. Others find clarity, peace, or an unexpected release of emotions. This is not a coincidence. It is what happens when we enter a space where the spiritual has been honored, where prayer has been poured into the very foundation, where faith has created an atmosphere of divine presence. Yet this presence is not something that can be grasped or contained. It is felt in moments of deep silence, in the collective breath of a congregation singing in unison, in the hush before a prayer is spoken. It does not shout for attention, it simply waits, ever present for us to become still enough to notice it. Many people today speak of spirituality without religion, of seeking God outside of organized worship, and while it is true that God is everywhere, it is also true that certain places make it easier to experience Him. Just as water flows more freely in a riverbed than in dry land, the presence of God is more palpable where people have gathered in His name for generations. A church, when truly alive in spirit, is such a place. To be connected to the church is to be connected to something that extends beyond the individual self. It is to step into a larger current, a movement of faith that has carried countless souls before us. It is to enter a sacred rhythm where prayers do not end when we leave the building, but continue to resonate in our hearts. It is to recognize that we are never alone, that we are held in something vast and unshakable. This is the power of the church, not as an institution, but as a living presence, a presence that calls us out of our small selves and into something greater, a presence that does not demand belief, but simply invites us to rest, to listen, and to remember the truth that has always been within us. Spiritual growth is not something that happens in isolation. While solitude has its place, true transformation occurs when we come together, when we step beyond the narrow boundaries of the personal self and into the shared experience of a community. The church is not merely a gathering of individuals, it is a collective field of faith, a sacred space where the energy of many seekers merges into something greater than the sum of its parts. There is something profoundly powerful about sitting among others who seek the same truth, who yearn for the same peace, who surrender to the same presence. In this shared space, something within us begins to shift. The mind, often restless and filled with thoughts, starts to quiet down. The heart, which may have been weighed down by burdens, begins to lighten. A deep sense of belonging arises, not because of any external validation, but because the walls of separation begin to dissolve. When we walk this path alone, it is easy to become lost in the stories of the mind. Doubts arise. Resistance creeps in. The distractions of daily life pull us away from the deeper reality we long to experience. But when we walk together, something holds us. The presence of others on the same journey serves as a reminder, a reflection of the truth we sometimes forget. Their faith strengthens our own. Their devotion calls us back when we drift. The power of community is not just in shared beliefs or traditions. It is in the unspoken energy that is created when people come together with an open heart. Have you ever noticed how silence feels different when you are alone compared to when you are in a room full of people in prayer? There is a tangible presence, an invisible but undeniable connection that unites every soul in the room. It is as if, for a moment, the usual barriers of identity, background, and personal history fade away, and all that remains is the simple presence of being. This is why spiritual growth accelerates when we are connected to a church. Alone, the journey can feel slow, uncertain, and filled with obstacles, but within a community there is a momentum, a force that carries us forward, even when we do not have the strength to move ourselves. When one among us falters, another is there to lift. When doubt clouds our vision, someone else's faith shines brightly enough to illuminate the way. Even beyond words, beyond sermons and teachings, the energy of a spiritual community is itself a teacher. Just by being in such a space, we absorb something, an unseen but deeply felt wisdom that is transmitted not through speech, but through presence. The more we immerse ourselves in this field of collective faith, the more we begin to embody it. What once felt like a distant ideal becomes a lived experience. And as we continue to show up, something profound happens. The boundaries between me and them start to blur. We begin to see ourselves in the faces of those around us. We recognize the same struggles, the same longings, the same divine presence within each heart. This realization dissolves the illusion of separation, revealing what has always been true. We are not alone, and we never have been. The church is not just a place where we gather, it is a space where we awaken. It holds us, supports us, and reminds us of who we truly are. It is a reflection of the deeper reality that we often forget in the busyness of life. It is not about conforming to a set of rules, but about stepping into a field of grace where growth happens naturally, simply by being present. In this togetherness, we do not just learn about God, we experience Him. not as an idea, but as a living presence moving through us all. The church is often seen as an institution, a place of rituals, doctrines, and traditions. But beyond all of that, it is something much deeper. It is a space of presence, a doorway into something beyond thought, beyond belief, beyond the restless movement of the mind. It is not just a set of rules or a structure of religious authority. It is an opening into stillness, an invitation to step out of the constant mental noise. When we walk into a church with an open heart, we can sense something different. There is a quietness, not just an absence of sound, but a deeper silence that seems to hold everything together. It is the same silence that we find in nature, in the stillness of a sunrise, in the vast openness of the sky. This silence is not empty, it is full. It carries a presence, a knowing, a sacredness that words cannot fully express. In this space, we are not required to figure anything out, to analyze, or to prove ourselves. We are simply asked to be, to let go, to rest in what is already here. Religion in its highest form is not about blind adherence to rules or memorized prayers. It is about direct experience, experiencing the presence of God, not as an abstract concept, but as a living reality within us. The mind may resist this, trying to make sense of it, trying to fit it into familiar categories. But presence cannot be grasped by thought. It is felt, known, and recognized in moments of deep stillness. This is why the church, when approached with an open heart, becomes not just a place of worship, but a place of awakening. There is a reason why people often feel a shift in consciousness when they enter a sacred space. It is not because the walls of the church hold any special power on their own, but because these places have been infused with devotion, with prayer, with the surrendered hearts of countless seekers who came before. The very air feels different, because for generations people have gathered in that space to turn their attention away from the fleeting concerns of the world and toward something eternal. When we gather in the church, we are not just attending a service. We are entering into a field of presence. The words spoken in prayer or scripture are important, but even beyond the word, there is something else happening. Something is being transmitted, not through the intellect, but through the heart. It is as if for a brief moment we remember what we have always known but had forgotten in the busyness of life. We remember that we are not separate, that we are held in something vast and unshakable. The power of being in this space is that it allows us to experience what is always present but so often overlooked. It is not that God is more present in a church than anywhere else. It is that we, in the quiet of that space, become more present to Him. The distractions fall away, the mind slows down, and suddenly there is space. Space to feel, to breathe, to simply be. The beauty of this experience is that it is not confined to a single moment or a single place. Once we have touched this presence, it begins to follow us. We may leave the church, but something within us has shifted. We become more aware of the sacredness in the ordinary moments of life, more attuned to the stillness that exists beneath all things. The church, in its truest form, is not just a building. It is a reminder, a reflection of the deeper reality that is always here. It is not about belief, it is about being. And healing does not come from the mind's attempts to fix, control, or resist. It comes from something much deeper, something beyond thought. True healing happens when we step out of the stories that have kept us trapped in pain and into a space where we are fully seen, fully held, fully accepted. The church is such a space, not because of its physical walls, but because of the presence it holds. It is a place where the burdens we have carried alone can finally be laid down, where suffering begins to dissolve, in the presence of something greater than ourselves. When we are disconnected from others, suffering intensifies. The mind, left to itself, creates endless cycles of worry, regret, and fear. It tells us that we must figure everything out on our own, that no one will understand, that we are separate from the rest of the world. And so we carry our pain silently, believing that no one else feels what we feel. But suffering thrives in isolation. It grows in the shadows of secrecy, in the belief that we are alone. Healing, however, happens in connection. When we step into the church, something begins to shift. We are no longer just individuals carrying out private struggles. We become part of something larger. We sit among others who, though their stories may be different, have known pain, doubt, and longing just as we have. In their presence, we begin to recognize that we are not alone. This recognition itself is healing. It breaks through the illusion of separation, reminding us that our struggles are not unique, that others have walked through darkness and emerged into light. The power of connection in the church is not just in words, but in presence. Sometimes healing does not come from a sermon or a teaching, but simply from sitting in the presence of others, from being surrounded by faith, even when our own faith feels weak. There is a silent strength in knowing that we do not have to carry everything by ourselves, that there are others who will stand with us, pray with us, and hold space for us as we navigate our own journey. There are moments when the pain we carry feels too heavy, when we do not know how to move forward. In these moments, the church becomes a place where we can simply be, without needing to pretend, without needing to have all the answers. It is a space where we can bring our brokenness, our doubts, and our fears, and know that we are not rejected, that we are not judged. In this space of unconditional presence, healing begins. It is not always instant. Healing is not about erasing the past or avoiding pain. It is about transforming our relationship with it. In the presence of love, pain no longer defines us. In the presence of faith, suffering loses its grip. We begin to see that even in our struggles, we are held by something vast, something unshakable. We begin to understand that healing is not about returning to who we once were, but about awakening to who we have always been. The church is not a place for perfect people. It is a place for those who seek, for those who long for something more, for those who are ready to release the weight they have carried for too long. It is a space where transformation happens not through effort, but through surrender. When we gather in faith, something within us begins to heal, not through force, but through grace. The burdens that once seemed impossible to bear begin to lighten. The wounds that once felt permanent begin to fade. And in that sacred space of connection, we come to see that healing was never about being fixed. It was about remembering that we were never truly broken. Serving within the church is not just an act of duty, it is a profound path to awakening. When we serve, something shifts within us. The focus moves away from the endless preoccupations of the mind, the constant thinking about ourselves, our worries, our desires, and instead we enter into a space of giving. In that moment, the sense of separation begins to dissolve. We no longer see ourselves as isolated individuals trying to manage life alone. Instead, we become part of a greater flow, a movement of grace that extends beyond the personal self. The mind is always seeking happiness, seeking fulfillment, seeking some future moment when everything will feel complete. But the paradox is that the more we chase fulfillment for ourselves, the more elusive it becomes. It is only when we step outside of ourselves, when we give without expecting anything in return, that we begin to experience true joy. This is the quiet but extraordinary secret of service. What we give away comes back to us in ways we could never have predicted. When we serve in the church, we do not just help others, we awaken something dormant within ourselves. There is a deep nourishment that comes from being part of something greater, from knowing that our presence and actions contribute to a collective good. The act of serving, whether in large or small ways, softens the ego allowing us to experience a deeper connection to life itself. We begin to see that we are not separate from those we serve, that their joy is our joy, their healing is our healing. In this realization, the rigid boundaries of self begin to fade, and what remains is love moving through us, unhindered, unfiltered. In a world that constantly asks, "What can I gain?" service invites us to ask, "What can I give?" And in this shift, something miraculous happens. The weight of self-concern, the endless cycle of wanting and striving, begins to lighten. We stop looking for purpose in abstract ideas and instead find it in simple acts of kindness, in the quiet moments of helping another, in the silent knowing that we are playing our part in something sacred. Many people search endlessly for meaning, believing it will come through personal achievement, material success, or external validation. Yet meaning is not something we find, it is something we give. The deepest fulfillment does not come from what we accumulate, but from what we offer. And in the act of offering, we step into the flow of divine presence, where life no longer feels like a series of disconnected events, but rather a sacred unfolding. Serving in the church is not about obligation, it is about presence, it is about showing up, not just physically, but with an open heart, with a willingness to be used for something beyond the small self. It does not matter whether the act is big or small, whether it is noticed or unseen. Each act of service carries within it the same essence, the same divine movement. Whether it is offering a prayer, helping a stranger, or simply being there for someone in need, every act of giving creates a ripple, a shift in consciousness that extends far beyond what the mind can comprehend. Over time, this path of service transforms us. The need to prove ourselves, to seek recognition, begins to fade. We no longer serve because we should, but because it becomes natural, an expression of who we are. In serving, we are not losing ourselves, we are finding ourselves in the truest sense. And in that discovery, we come to see that the love, peace, and fulfillment we have been searching for were never outside of us. They were waiting all along, hidden in the simple act of giving. Faith is not just a belief in something unseen, it is a living force, a deep inner knowing that carries us through the uncertainties of life. It is not something that we can fully grasp with the mind, nor is it something that can be forced. It arises naturally when we surrender to the deeper reality that is always present, always guiding, always holding us. When we are connected to the church, faith is no longer something abstract. It becomes alive within us. It becomes something we experience, something we are immersed in, something that strengthens us in ways we may not even realize. In a world that constantly shifts and changes, where nothing stays the same for long, faith is the anchor. Without it, we are tossed by every storm, unsettled by every challenge, weighed down by every fear. The mind is always searching for certainty, for something solid to hold on to, but the world offers no guarantees. Situations change, people come and go. The plans we carefully construct do not always unfold as expected. If our sense of security is tied to things that are temporary, then we will always live in fear of losing them. But faith connects us to something beyond what we see. It reminds us that even when circumstances seem uncertain, there is a deeper order at work, a presence that is unshakable, a foundation that does not crumble. When we are surrounded by others who walk in faith, something within us begins to shift. Doubts that once felt overwhelming begin to lose their grip. Fear, which seems so powerful in isolation, starts to dissolve in the presence of a community that believes. We realize that faith is not something we must struggle to create on our own. It is something we step into. It is something that is strengthened when we are in the presence of those who carry it, who live by it, who reflect it back to us when we need it most. Faith is not about pretending that challenges do not exist. It is about seeing beyond them. It is about trusting that even in difficulty, even in times of waiting, even when we do not yet understand, something is working in our favor. The mind resists this. It wants proof. It wants answers now. But faith teaches us to rest in the unknown, to trust even when we cannot see the full picture. When we are connected to the church, we are reminded of the countless ways faith has carried those who came before us. We hear stories of trials turned into triumphs, of prayers answered in unexpected ways, of people who held on to faith even when everything around them seemed to say otherwise. These stories are not just meant to, when we are connected to the church, something profound happens within us. We begin to realize that our spiritual journey is not meant to be a solitary path, but a shared experience. Growth does not happen in isolation. The soul expands when it is nurtured by the presence of others, by the collective faith, wisdom, and love of a spiritual community. It is easy to think that we can walk this path alone, that we can develop our faith in the quiet of our own minds. But there is a depth of transformation that only occurs when we are in connection with others. Spiritual maturity is not just about knowledge, it is about presence. It is about the deepening of awareness, the expansion of the heart, the quiet but steady shift from fear to faith, from doubt to trust, from separation to unity. Alone we may struggle with our doubts, feeling as though we are the only ones who question, the only ones who waver. But in the presence of a church community, we see that faith is not about never struggling. It is about continuing to move forward despite the struggles. We see that doubt is not a weakness, but an invitation to go deeper. We see that others have walked through the same valleys and have come out stronger, wiser, more deeply rooted. The energy of a spiritual community holds us in ways we do not always realize. When we pray alone, there is power in that, but when we pray together, something shifts. There is a collective strength, an unseen force that moves through the room, lifting us beyond our individual concerns and into a greater awareness. It is as if our personal burdens are no longer carried alone, but are placed into the hands of something greater, something vast, something unshakable. Growth requires challenges, but it also requires support. The church provides both. It invites us to step beyond our comfort zones, to see beyond our limited perspectives, to stretch into a faith that is not just theoretical but lived. At the same time, it surrounds us with those who have walked this path before us, those who have wisdom to share, those who remind us that we are not alone in this journey. In the presence of such a community, we find encouragement when we feel weak, guidance when we feel lost, and reassurance when we feel uncertain. Spiritual growth is not a single event. It is a continuous unfolding. It is not about reaching a final destination, but about deepening into presence, about becoming more aligned with truth, about awakening to the divine in ways we never expected. The church serves as a mirror, reflecting back to us the places where we are growing, the places where we are still resisting, the places where we are being invited into greater surrender. It is in this space that we learn, not just through sermons or teachings, but through the very act of being in connection with others who are also on this path. There is a wisdom that flows through the collective experience of the church. It is not just about what is said, but about what is felt, about what is transmitted through presence, through worship, through shared silence, through simple acts of kindness. When we immerse ourselves in this environment, our understanding deepens. We begin to see things differently. The same scripture we have heard many times suddenly speaks to us in a new way. The same prayers take on a deeper significance. The same faith that once seemed fragile now feels unshakable. And as we continue to grow, something else happens. We begin to give back. Spiritual growth is not just about receiving, it is about sharing. As we are strengthened, we become a source of strength for others. As we gain wisdom, we become a voice of encouragement. As we experience healing, we extend compassion to those who are still hurting. In this way, the cycle continues. We do not just grow for ourselves, we grow for the community, for the world, for the unfolding of something far greater than we can comprehend. When we are connected to the church, we are connected to something greater than ourselves. It is not just about attending services or following traditions. It is about stepping into a space where faith becomes alive, where healing takes place, where burdens are shared, and where spiritual growth flourishes. In a world that often feels chaotic, uncertain, and isolating, the church offers a refuge, a reminder that we are not alone, that we are held by something deeper, something eternal. Through this connection, we experience the power of presence, the strength of community, and the peace that comes from surrendering to a faith that is unshakable. We learn that healing does not happen in isolation, but in the presence of those who uplift and walk alongside us. We discover that true fulfillment is not in seeking for ourselves, but in giving, in serving, in becoming an extension of the love we receive. And as we grow, we begin to see that this journey was never just about us. It was always about something bigger, something sacred, something that transforms not only our own lives, but the lives of those around us. So we continue forward, not as individuals trying to navigate life alone, but as part of a living, breathing body of faith. We move with a renewed sense of purpose, anchored in something unshakable, strengthened by the presence of those who walk with us. And as we do, we find that the power of being connected to the church is not just about where we go, it is about who we become.